Welcome back for the last session for today. I'm Donald Fortescue. I teach in the furniture program and the graduate fine arts program here at CCA, and my own work uses digital technology as well as traditional crafts. So I understand all of the glitches and troubles that everyone's been going through today. In fact, we've found out what the problem was. This is the problem. We've removed it from the system and it won't be doing anything anymore. But this topic, that we've got for the last session this afternoon, digital craft, like how can you even talk about digital craft? Just even all the talks we've had today have been digitized in some way or another. It's a huge and multifaceted topic which you can only barely skim in the short time we've got this afternoon, especially with cocktails waiting for us over at the CCA campus. So I'll just give a few framing remarks and introduce our two speakers, and then we can get down to discussing it. But I don't think we've mentioned William Morris today, and I thought we should mention William Morris just because a day can't go by in the craft community without mentioning William Morris, and Glenn kindly mentioned him last night, so that was really excellent. But it seems like the arts and craft movement really set, in some ways, the DNA of all the subsequent craft movements of the 20th century. And it was forged at a time when the effects of the last great human revolution, the Industrial Revolution, were being very clearly played out, especially in the UK. And by that time, the Industrial Revolution had been in progress since the, mid-1700s, late 1700s perhaps, 100 years or so. And even at that stage, even when Ruskin spoke about the effects of the Russian Revolution, sorry, I was getting my things confused. I was thinking of another famous person who talked about things at that stage as well. Even Ruskin talking about it. The Industrial Revolution had been well and truly proceeding by that stage. And so here we are in the digital revolution, perhaps. And we're lucky now because the Industrial Revolution's a little bit of a blurry entity, but this is the source of the digital revolution. Many of you might recognise this. Some of you might not recognise this at all. This is the very first transistor that was ever developed by good old Ma Bell, AT&T, in the Bell Labs. And this is a replica of the first transistor developed in 1947 by Shockley, Bardeen and Brattain. And so the digital revolution began in December 1947, if anyone ever asks you that question. And this single invention really marks the beginning of the digital revolution, really. The silicon-based transistor, which is the one we're more familiar with now, was developed about 7 years later in 1954, as was the first fully transistorized computer. And the first integrated circuit came in 1958, which is the year after Sputnik launched as well. So, the mid-50s is really when the digital revolution started to swing in. So we're only barely 50 years into the digital revolution. And it's radically changing the way humans operate on the planet, just like the Industrial Revolution did before it. And the consequences and implications are only just really beginning to be played out. And I just started to think, while preparing this discussion and to think about the panel we're talking about tonight, how could you think about digital craft at all? It's a bit like saying human craft. There's this sort of, nowadays the digital is so implicated in everything we do that you just can't really imagine being a creative person in the 21st century without digital components. And so I started to think about what would life be like without cell phones, email, the web, digital cameras, video, sound recorders, desktop publishing, software applications like Word, Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, Rhino, SolidWorks, Final Cut Pro, After Effects, that list goes on forever. Online services such as Google, PayPal, Amazon, eBay, Etsy, file sharing protocols, personal websites, e-zines, online journals and blogs, social networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter. Then there's the incredible variety of silicon-based technologies becoming available every day, such as processor-embedded devices, RF tracking, LED lighting, thin film solar panels and smart materials. And then finally, on top of all of that, there's the secondary consequences of that. All the stuff that's produced with those digital technologies that doesn't necessarily seem digital on first sight, but is. Where would almost all of our endeavours be without the digital? And so, it's almost impossible to think of how you can be creative that isn't, at least in some part, digital nowadays. And despite its pervasive nature, or perhaps even because of its pervasive nature, the digital realm does provide opportunities for artists and designers, and even craftspeople, to operate in ways that were impossible even at the end of the 20th century, all that decade ago, 10 years ago. So the potential for international connectivity and the concomitant potential for empowerment of grassroots movements has been surprisingly demonstrated recently with the varied and yet to be played out results in the Arab world. And then there's the need to address the causes of global warming and to incorporate renewable energy resources. You know, all of these things are apparent to all of us, and they're just two of the kind of tiny little areas that the digital realm opens up to us. And so I'd like to introduce our two speakers this afternoon who are going to introduce through their work some of the very different ways of using digital technologies. The scope of their varied practices goes some way towards defining the breadth and depth of the potential that's opening up for us now in the beginning of the 21st century and just 50 years into the digital revolution. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Kat Mazza. She's an artist whose work combines craft with digital media to explore the overlaps between textiles, technology, and labour. Three apparently divergent topics, but even after the last day or so of discussions, we can see how implicated they are with each other. She's the founder of Micro Revolt, which is a web-based project that hosts the free knitwear program, KnitPro program. She received a 2007 Rockefeller Media Arts Fellow in New Media and a 2008 Creative Capital Grant in Film and Video. She's shown work all around the world, in Milan and the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, in Istanbul, in Manchester, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Ars Electronica at Linz in Austria. In 2010 alone, her work was exhibited at the Institute for Contemporary Arts in San Jose, just south of here, at the Jan Koppings Landsmuseum in Jan Koppings in Sweden, the Museum of Contemporary Craft in Portland, and at the Sheldon Art Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska. We're both currently showing in the exhibition The New Materiality, the use of digital technologies in contemporary craft, which opened, I think, last week at the Milwaukee Art Museum, which is curated by Fo Wilson, who's in the audience here, and there's about 5 or 6 people showing in that show in the audience today. She was a founding staff member of the New York City Art and Technology Center, I-Beam, where she was involved from 1999 to 2002, and she received her MFA from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and a BFA from Carnegie Mellon, and she's currently an assistant professor of art at UMass Boston. And I'd like to make a little quote from Julia Bryan Wilson, who we've heard from earlier today, who argued in her recent article in Art Forum, detailing the problematics and positioning of contemporary craftivism, that the real value of craft at this moment has nothing to do with a stable ideology or indeed any singular quality inhering in the idea of craft, but rather with craft's strange, pressured and contested position within the schematic of contemporary consumption. Craft is uniquely positioned to allow us to reconsider the politics of materiality and exchange, their labours, pleasures and hazards. And Kat's talk this afternoon is Craft in the Grid, and I'd like to welcome Kat to the stage, wherever she is.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a tremendous honor to be here and to speak with all of you. And I'm really looking forward to how we all kind of take this conference home with us, how we may adapt our practices in the way that we talk and think and make craft. So I was on the fence about confessing this, but my brain is moving kind of at like 3/4 speed. I brought my 5-month-old. I have a wee baby, and normally I kind of freestyle, but then just before I came, I was like, I'm going to write it down just in case. So anyway, here we go. Crafting the grid. So in thinking about digital craft, one of the things that I find appealing in my own practice, both with digital media and textiles, and I know a lot of people who combine these mediums agree with this, is we find pleasure in applying sort of a set of instructions and arriving at an unexpected outcome. And, so even if you look at this pattern, this first slide, this is a pattern generated from the freeware program called KnitPro. You can imagine the kind of infinite ways in which this pattern could be materialized. So the first project that I decided to introduce is a project called Knitoscope, and I often develop custom softwares to create the work that I do. And Nitoscope translates digital video files into stitched animations. And it's programmed in C with QuickTime and OpenGL. And this is something that I worked on with a technologist, programmer, and artist, Sean Lawson. And I thought I would start with one of the first experiments using Nitoscope. And then I'll show one of the more recent. So this is the source of this animation, this video art piece, is a film called Fiber to Fabric. And some of you know the work of artist and writer Sabrina Geschwantner, and she had collected a lot of these disposed 16mm films from FIT. And she gave me this 16mm film, Fiber to Fabric, which is about the industrial process of making fabric. And I digitized that and then had worked on this database of stitches using crewel embroidery. And this is what it looks like. So. Sound doesn't start until a little bit later, after the credits.
At first, the fiber or hair was spun into thread by hand. Then the thread was woven into cloth. As the loom operates, a shuttle carries the thread back and forth between other threads. This diagram shows how threads are woven together to make cloth. Notice how the threads that go across are passed over and the fibers are combed. This is called carding. Then the fibers are twisted into loose strands or ropes of cotton. These cotton strands are combined and twisted, and sometimes the cotton is blended with other fibers.
Okay. So one of the first experiments with Nitoscope, and then the next one that I'm going to show is called Knit for Defense. And this was kind of done concurrently with a project called Stitch for Senate, which involved some research about the history of American wartime knitting. So these sort of patriotic knitting initiatives of creating combat garments for soldiers fighting in war. And so this piece is in progress. It's one of a 3-channel video, and the finished piece is World War II, Vietnam, and the current wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the motifs sort of interact with each other, but I'm just showing the completed part, which is from World War II. So using the same technology, but a very different look, and that first one was actually 36 stitches across, and this one is twice that size, so a little bit higher resolution in knitting there. Thanks. I wasn't expecting applause. Okay, so just a little bit more about the way that works. So I'll hand stitch a swatch. So on the left here is some of the crewel embroidery stitches from that first piece, film to fiber. And those go into a database of stitches. The program itself, if I'm working with a larger file, will lower the resolution. It interpolates the color, so it takes, you know, the values of all the colors surrounding the stitch and then assigns a color to it, and then it assigns a stitch to that color. Right side of the slide is a machine knitted swatch that I used to create that last piece we just saw, Knit for Defense. The structure of it is pretty uniform, and they interlock, and I tried to make some variation in the stitches for that piece. So that's the video work, and the other work that I do is really quite different, and I think it circulates a lot better because it combines web media and workshops and performance and so on. And these are the microrevolt projects. I often, I wanted to kind of introduce some of the influences, the kind of work that was in my orbit before I created those projects, because I think it helps understand the work that I was doing. I think after you start to work in a certain way for a while, you start to question it. And then you go back to, you know, why am I doing this? And then you think about your influences. So at the moment where I was before the microrevolt projects, I was influenced by my peers and my professors. And I don't know how well this kind of subgenre of electronic art circulates in craft communities, but tactical media and hacktivism were kind of in my orbit, and the kind of work that I intended to achieve with the microrevolt projects. And just to give you an idea about the kind of work that we were doing, it was 1999. This was actually our senior poster from our senior class at Carnegie Mellon. Our collective was called Carbon Defense League, and we weren't embarrassed to write things like advocating the explorations of digital domains. We didn't really know that we'd be like going to sleep with our smartphones, or there'd be like a so-called Twitter revolution in Egypt. So we were just, you know, it's just kind of turn of the century moment, and we were hacking into Game Boy cartridges, reprogramming the graphics chip and circulating those games. And another collective that was happening, you know, sort of in my orbit at Carnegie Mellon was the Institute for Applied Autonomy, and I'm sure many of you know this work, The Graffiti Writer, where they, instead of, you know, kind of eliminating the human in graffiti writing so that that person wouldn't get arrested, it's a robot that much in the style of a dot matrix printer, you know, writes out these messages in paint. So that's the Graffiti Writer. And I'm really happy to say that this kind of moment in history is written about in a really clear and helpful way. I'm very grateful for it. And I think people who are interested in this work should look at this book, Dark Matter, Art and Politics in the Age of Enterprise Culture, because it kind of does a good job in looking at collectivism and sort of the work that informs this kind of tactical media work. So anyway, those are sort of in my orbit before I created Knit Pro. Knit Pro is a freeware that translates digital images into needlecraft grid patterns. I'm very interested in the history of transcribing textile patterns into the framework of the grid, but the way it just generally works is it'll take a digital image. This one's quite small, so it doesn't have to lower the resolution, but it'll map a grid over it, and then these are sort of 3 stitched examples using the same shell pattern. So that's cross stitch and knit and needlepoint and a Knit Pro pattern. Interface for Knit Pro. Again, you just upload an image like you would upload an email attachment. And I've been really inspired, as I'm sure a lot of you have been, by the kind of the rise of craft hobbyist culture. And for me, it's been really exciting to see what different people have been making with Knit Pro. This is an example of a woman in Indiana who is just so prolific. She makes all these crochet Afghans, Marilyn Monroe, The Doors, Mona Lisa, Elvis, John Travolta, and this is her son, which I think is really charming that she threw her son in there. I was really astounded when I first started kind of, you know, using Google Analytics, really helpful tool, which mapped the user traffic of Knit Pro. And so, you know, for the most part, it is being used in the US, but it has this really broad usership, that is global. And so for me, I was kind of putting together the fact that these places have textile traditions. They are being compromised because labor is being outsourced, and those traditions are getting squashed, as we've been talking about. And but at the same time, there is this hobbyist culture that may be using Knit Pro, and I don't know in what way, but it kind of excited me, the possibility that the sort of pleasure that goes into making stuff that we're witnessing now could be happening in all those places. And kind of the fantasy of Micro Revolt from its beginning was this idea of mobilizing craft hobbyists and anti-sweatshop activism, this idea that they're a compelling audience in the sense that they can kind of empathize with the tacit labor process that goes into making a garment. And another thing that I kind of was thinking about with that map versus the user of the hobbyist kind of user base of Knit Pro, thinking about that in contrast, of course, to the way that the garment industry functions now, which is, as many of us know, is things may be designed in the U.S. and Europe, but it's outsourced to the developing world, and there's a lot of the horrific conditions, garment makers doing repetitive subtasks in unsanitary conditions for unfair wages and so on. And that's how I kind of arrived at this idea of the Nike blanket petition, which, just to move quickly through it, I'm going to show a video about So this talks about Knit Pro and the Nike blanket petition, which again is this idea of trying to mobilize craft hobbyists. Okay, so that last text that you read is a little bit misleading because what I like about that video is it kind of shows the different craft venues and art spaces and activist kind of workshops that it traveled to. And you know, on that tour, and there's many iterations of that video, I have to change that one because it did, the Nike blanket did not go to Nike. Over time, the kind of feedback that I got, and this, remember this project was 2003 to 2008, so quite a long time. The feedback that I got was that you can't just give it away to Nike. They're not going to, you know, what are they going to do with that? And so now I have this object in my studio in Boston. But it did go to Istanbul because of Otto, who's one of my favorite craft thinkers. It was actually the colorful border squares that you saw on the blanket were weaved together. There's many aspects to an exhibition that he organized, but one of them involved weaving the border squares into the Nike blanket. And what was kind of interesting about it in Istanbul, in the gallery, was right next door to a Nike town store. Then Allison Mitchell, another one of my favorite artists who presented this morning, organized a show with Judy Chicago, and there was kind of a supplement show of third wave feminists, artists looking at you know, fiber and feminist concepts. So it toured to these different spaces, but most interestingly, it went to the Museum of Contemporary Craft, and that was last summer. And I believe Namita's here. And when it was there, I just was like, what the heck, we'll just email everybody at Nike. And so I don't know how exactly I got a hold of a lot of their emails, and wrote Phil Knight. It bounced back. So Phil Knight is the chairman of the board. So his email bounced back, but the CEO, Mark Parker, just wrote me back. I was like, oh, 5 years. I didn't even think of that. Just like email the CEO. So this was the very polite response that I received because I invited him to the show. The Museum of Contemporary Craft that Namita runs is 9 miles from Nike headquarters. So this is what I invite him and tell them about this protest blanket and all the people that have contributed and from 30 countries and so on. And he writes, "Dear Kat, thank you for your invitation to come to MOC to view the Nike blanket petition. I'm currently in Madrid, so I can't make it to the museum until later next week. I'll certainly come by for a visit," and so on. I hope you've enjoyed your residence. So we were all really excited, and we were like, well, let's give this multimillionaire a free pass to the museum. He doesn't have to pay admission, and maybe he'll come in, we'll have a conversation, but I don't believe he ever came, so it's kind of a sad ending to a long project. But again, for me, the most exciting and exhilarating part of that piece was just getting all those contributions and the experience of touring it and kind of the sort of solidarity high you have when you're working on an activist project, which brings me to this next one, which was a very impromptu project that just happened last weekend. One of the things that a lot of you have heard about, I'm sure, is that it was the centennial of the Triangle Waste Factory fire. And so that was 100 years ago in New York City when 146 women, mostly young women, mostly immigrant women, died. And, that was happening a lot at the time. And last weekend, March 25th, 1911, this 100th anniversary. But what made this such a horrific tragedy was many of the women leapt to their death and they were on fire. So it was this incredible, over 50 of them. So it was this incredible spectacle. And it really was this catalyst for the early labor movement. And it kind of crossed class boundaries in the sense that, upper middle class women and the working class, and they had sort of overlaps with the suffrage movement, kind of banded together and say this isn't right. So things that we kind of enjoy that came out of the labor movement early last century, like the 8-hour workday and the weekend and still working on health benefits, but these kinds of things that happened 100 years ago because of this fire, is a connection that this anti-sweatshop campaign wanted to make between then and now. This is actually a fire in Bangladesh, a factory fire that happened just this past December. The garment workers were making H&M and Walmart and JCPenney, and they had several victims as well. And so they're sort of eerily similar. And so the idea of the 146 project, which is similar to the blanket and similar to this other project that I did called Stitch for Senate, was this sort of open call for people to craft these armbands enumerating the victims. And the idea of it was, we have all these. We have this loose network of folks that are excited about crafting, but we're not like unionized. What would happen if there was like this loose knit union, or what if these folks, these people that are going to craft fairs and kind of becoming these online merchants again, kind of saw themselves in connection to this larger labor movement side by side with, I know this is kind of a lefty fantasy, but with service workers and so on. And so there was a major event on the centennial in which I invited people to submit these armbands and show up on the street. And only 2 people came, but I got hobbyists from 53 cities. So this is the folks that participated, Secretary of Labor, Warren One, and students, and these are actually students from Bangladesh. And the armbands are going to be sent to this worker center where they're organizing. So just a really quick slide to show the bands that came in. And then another thing that I'm developing right now, working with the same programmer that helped make Knit Pro, is a project which I'm calling the Textile Grid Archive, and I don't like that title yet. So, but the idea of it is that it's a searchable database for scholars, artisans, and hobbyists who are studying the historical, cross-cultural, and global method of producing textile patterns within the framework of the grid. And so I've gone to places like Shetland in the northern coast of Scotland, where they have this beautiful collection. They've transcribed, it looks like in some kind of red and blue ink, traditional patterns there. And the Center for Traditional Textiles in Cusco in Peru. And the idea for this work is really just to I'm kind of interested in the fact that you can have a pattern that was, an exo pattern that was created centuries later than a Peruvian pattern, but they might have some of the same geometries. And also working with existing institutions, museum institutions, and textile conservators and so on who can kind of annotate the symbolic meaning, the sort of cultural narratives that are happening in these patterns. And this is everything that I had to show, so thank you so much.
Sheila Kennedy, who's the only architect we've heard from today, and I think the only architect who's speaking at the conference. Oh, right, there's another one speaking tomorrow as well. So I'm really excited to have Sheila here today because I've been watching the work of her and her architectural firm for a number of years, so it's really exciting to have her here firsthand. She received her bachelor's degree in history, philosophy and literature from the College of Letters at Wesleyan University, and she studied architecture at the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris and received her Masters of Architecture from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. In 1990, she founded Kennedy and Weilich Architecture, which gets reduced to the acronym KVA, in partnership with Juan Frano Weilich. And as an associate professor of Harvard's GSD, Kennedy was the director of the MArch program from 1991 to 1995, and she's currently the professor of the practice of architecture at MIT. And as a founding principal of Kennedy and Weilich Architecture, Sheila has established a new model for an interdisciplinary design practice that explores architecture, digital technology, and emerging public needs. In 2000, as part of this project, Kennedy established MatX, a pioneering research into materials at KVA, which engages applied creative production across the fields of design, electronics, architecture and materials science. MATEX works collaboratively with business leaders, manufacturers, cultural institutions and public agencies to create designs, buildings, components and architecture that advances the widespread implementation of sustainable digital materials. Interesting idea. MATEX has developed designs and technology for a huge range of companies and organisations, for DuPont, Siemens, Osram, Herman Miller, Saint-Gobain, the North Face, the City of Porto in Portugal, the Federal Republic of Germany, and the United States Department of Energy. The MATEX Portable Light Project, a non-profit global initiative that enables people in the developing world to create and own portable energy harvesting solar textile kits, has been recognised with a 2009 US Congressional Award and a 2009 Energy Globe Award and a 2008 Tech Museum Laureate Award for technology that benefits humanity. Her work has been exhibited at the Cooper Hewitt, the International Rotterdam Biennale, the Vitra Design Museum in Germany, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, which is where I first saw it, and the Museum of Modern Art's Design and the Elastic Mind exhibition. She served as an advisor to the United States Department of Energy, the National Academy of Sciences, Government Industry Partnerships, and the Vision 2020 National Technology Roadmap. She's the author of multiple patents for the integration of digital technologies into architecture, building materials and textiles. Kennedy's research and work in architecture has been recognised by grants from the NEA and the National Academy of Sciences, both. Today, Sheila will give us an overview of several of KVA's projects that focus on craft and fabrication technology and the co-option by design of existing digital infrastructures and networks for new or different ends. Her title is called Going Soft, Hybrid Ecology, Mobility and the Emergent Public Realm. Please welcome Sheila.
Thank you, Donald, and thank you all. It's really been a fantastic presentation. I wanted to thank Kat for her presentation on this panel as well. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm also super excited there is another architect who's going to speak. I confess I was afraid that I was at the wrong conference, or that I might have been invited by mistake or something like that. Do they know I'm an architect? I'm not a craft artist. What I want to do is I want to share with you really quickly 5 projects that address craft, I think, in different ways, and they fall under the rubric of this idea about a change, a kind of cultural shift that we may be in the middle of, where we are understanding that some of the traditional ways in which we made architecture things, seawalls, dikes, dams, our electrical infrastructure, all of those kind of hard, centralized, heavy concrete things haven't really worked out that well. And in saying that, there's a kind of a criticism of modernism and a desire to kind of go to a different way of thinking. And what that is, I'm sure everyone in this room is wondering about, and I certainly don't have the answer. But I think it may, in our work, have something to do with going soft. In other words, thinking literally about soft, flexible materials like flexible electronics, but also about hard materials that can be made malleable, that can be adaptable. Thinking also about the soft energy path that was originally outlined by Amory Lovins back in the 1970s, thinking about software and computation and how that has really transformed the discipline of architecture, and also thinking about what's called soft policy. Sometimes it's called soft power. You might remember the 2004 book by Joseph Nye by the same title, Soft Power, and there he laid out the argument that the United States should not necessarily coerce through hard power, through war, and through economic sanctions and so forth, but should try to influence by persuasion, by holding out culture, and trying to make things that would entice the world to want them, like our education system was. So that's a little bit about this idea of going soft, and I hope we can discuss it more. The first project I want to talk about is a project that we're doing now. It's a project for MIT. Thank you. It's being commissioned for MIT's 150th birthday. Happy birthday, MIT. And this is really about trying to get at a tool that could actually make a sort of so-called 3D freeform fabrication. We may understand that There are a whole class of kind of lightweight robots. They're the KUKA, this is made by KUKA, and they're called KUKA 15s. And here they are at a Wired Next Fest show a couple years ago in a Juke Bots performance where they spun around and they're very agile and they actually scratched out songs and moved in rhythm and so forth at Wired Next Fest. And so it was pretty interesting to think about lightweight robots and what they could do. It's a slightly softer version of what's been happening in architecture schools around the country and really almost all around the world, where there's been a big investment in very big, heavy robots on very large tracks. And so we thought, how could we solve this problem? This is an image that you may recognize. It's the Kazam machine, the device at Cranbrook that in the 1940s that Charles Eames developed and that later Charles and Ray Eames used. And it was the first kind of mold-making machine to make standardized, reproducible chairs and plywood pieces. So it was a total breakthrough, and it has this very cool bicycle pump, which actually you can see there. It's a very interesting kind of low-tech thing. But making a mold is kind of a very large investment. How do we think today about actually making something that could be adaptable, that doesn't have to be the same thing made out of one mold? So in a lot of our work, we try to combine low-tech and high-tech, or traditional and so-called non-traditional technologies and techniques. And this is a technique called kerfing. It's a very traditional woodworking technique, and this is an example of a lute. In Switzerland, Christoph Schindler developed the zip shape, which is a digital version of this kerfing. And in this process, a machine kerfs out small slots, and then that allows two pieces to zip together. So we decided to try to advance that and try to explore that in the Soft Rocker project. So the KUKA 15 is a lightweight robot, and it has 5 axes of rotation and a 6th at the tool head there so that it spins around. And what we tried to do was to use a calibrated teeth shaping through an algorithm to make a free-form zip, to make a free-form shape so 2 panels lock together in a specific curve that's controlled by the software, and that becomes strong. And so hence was born the idea of a solar rocker, an object that could tip back and forth and could use our human weight, could use the weight of the body to help optimize the angle of the sun. So this is basically what the thing looks like. We developed a little, I don't know if you can see that right here. Yeah, good. A way of calibrating the center of the weight of the gravity, what happens when your body gets into it, so we could always make sure we were self-balanced. We laid out our boards, and we began to kerf this solar rocker. We were working with an MIT graduate in his lab in Boston, Rad Lab, using the KUKA 15 with a milling head put on it. So this became our tool, like our brush, and you can see it kerfing. And then here we use the power of air, very soft. We try to put the pieces together, and you can see a rocker here. And the final piece as it will appear at MIT. So if anyone's interested in manufacturing that, please talk to me afterwards. It's free form. You can customize it to any latitude in the world. The next project is actually about stone, how we can write a script to organize stone. This is a really different idea. It's like, how can we use a completely standard piece of stone that's a rectangle that's identical? And then how can we use computation to manipulate that so that we can take advantage of the free effects of daylight on a building? So our idea was to use this marble, and I'm just going to go very quickly through this because I think our time is short. But this is a project for a law school that we're doing. It's under construction in Philadelphia. And we have a context here. We have this very noble building, Silverman Hall, Flemish Bond brick and marble. And we developed a script that allowed us to look very carefully at the brick, and we sort of made these mega arches here and developed a script, which is this very small text here. Don't worry, there won't be a quiz afterwards, but it's a very simple Rhino script that allows us to make the prototype like the mock-up that you can see in the slide on the right, where each brick, we have individual control of how each brick is laid up. We also have been getting into gaming software a little bit to study this, and actually Rebecca at the audio said, I don't think your video is working. This is a very boring video compared to the art videos that we've seen, but it is working. And what it does is it shows you very slowly how light will actually move fairly accurately. So this is kind of critique, if you will, of the kind of typical architecture video, which is generally like an art video, very, very frantic and frenetic with a lot of motion and traffic and stuff like that. And the light comes into the inside of the building where we have some wood panels that also are identically the same, and they only vary by their rotational tilt like that. So that's a way that we've developed studying, and then of course our own craft in architecture, our technique is to begin to make drawings like this, which are instructions. As architects, we don't really make our own work, or we don't usually make it. We hand it off to someone else, so we need to produce those instructions. And here you can see this whole cascade of all the rotated panels that open up like books, and then how this is laid out here in that piece, in the entry piece. This is the building under construction, where you can look and see the entry piece right there. Oh darn, I've done something bad. Just one sec. Yep. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry, I'm not used to this computer. That's an image of the building as it will be. So now I'm going to kind of get into larger and less traditional projects and infrastructures. This is a project that's also under construction in New York. It's the East 34th Street Ferry Terminal. And here we looked around and we tried to make a different kind of building, one that didn't have everything centralized, all the building services in one package, but where we could have on-demand services, such as benches that, when it was cold, could warm just one individual, so there was no wasted heat, energy-efficient solid-state lighting, and a lightweight fabric roof. And an important idea was to try, this is a project for a commuter ferry boat up and down the island of Manhattan, and KVA was commissioned to do 6 ferry landings, and I'm going to talk about the project at 34th Street. So it turns out that there's an existing digital network, a communications network in Manhattan, and that is the GPS system. There are many, actually, but the one we were working with is a GPS system on Staten Island. And it's got satellites. It's a robust system, but it's not very well publicly used. So our idea was to try to take this existing urban system, a digital system, and to kind of co-opt it or appropriate it for a better public life up and down the East River Esplanade, where you can have real-time passenger connections, so-called smart transportation information, access to the internet for commuters, and also for residents and so forth. This is a view of the building. Never mind. I don't dare use the cursor anymore because I think I'll advance the slide, but you can see that the idea is just to float. We're working on this project with Schlag Bergerman Partners engineers, and this is actually the first digitally fabricated public building. It's under construction now. And we wanted to use this material, water. It's another free effect. We're lucky to be able to have it on this site. And so the idea was to try to take the sun, bouncing off the water in the south here, bouncing off and running and playing with that kind of network up against that reflective fabric, and that's a metal spluttered fabric that's semi-translucent. It's made by Versailles, a German company. And so what was interesting is here we are designing this large public transportation piece, and we're sewing. We're literally sewing doors into these skylight wells and unfolding cloth. And we used a very traditional stitched way of studying this, as well as using some software to develop the surface, that is to say, to create the pattern. These are little skylight mock-ups that Heather Mika Smith, who is a textile artist who works with us, she made these. She's a very important part of this project and many of our projects. And here we have a kind of a large mock-up with solid-state lighting around that ring. And so by day, the light comes through this skin on the roof. And at night, you get this kind of inversion of that figure. It becomes a kind of glowing, it goes from a void to kind of more of a volume. And this is what that looks like as you'd be approaching it about this time of year, going up and down the island. I'm actually not going to talk about this project because of time. Okay, all right, you're tempting me. Okay, I'll start with this. Actually, is there a way to go backwards here? Yes, I think I see it. Ta-da! Okay. This is a very famous painting of Minneapolis, before Minneapolis was Minneapolis. It's a painting by Albert Bierstadt. And it's the discovery of St. Francis, the discovery of the waterfalls of St. Francis. But of course, those waterfalls were not discovered by and named. They were part of indigenous native culture for really hundreds of years. And so we recently won a competition to kind of get into this unknown part of Minneapolis, which today looks like this. It's 5 miles of the upper Mississippi River. It's generally industrial, and our task is to create a new public park. We wanted to bring the people here who are cut off from the river down through to the riverfront and create these paths. But we all know that rivers don't really flow the way we want them to, with our kind of concrete edges and barriers. And so this river, the Mississippi River, will wash out and wash in, and those processes, those river processes, are at the heart of kind of River First, and it's kind of the reason why I wanted to share this is because it's a very new project. We just won this project, and it's thinking about soft infrastructure at a very large riparian or river ecology scale. So what do you do about that? Well, you have to create a type of park that actually can wash out too, and you have to create a lot of surfaces that can absorb water, and this can become a kind of new municipal eco-infrastructure for the city of Minneapolis, as well as part of the national park system. And I know there was a previous speaker who was just speaking about this. We also developed a concept for iPhone, a kind of river ecology outreach, and yes, that murky water is actually the upper Mississippi River, and you can connect every morning and see actually how the oysters are doing, because they're bed feeders and they're filter fish, and they will give you a sense about the salinity and the pH quality of the water, and then see how the fish are doing and so forth. So we were very interested in these kind of larger connections between growing the economy and improving the river's health, and using non-conventional architectural media and existing networks to do so. Okay. I have this and one other project. This is the Portable Light Project. This is the kit that Donald mentioned. A very interesting example of global to local flat to form manufacturing with a pretty interesting story behind it, which I'll share with you. This is a project that's started in Mexico and is now in active use in several different countries. Please check out our website, www.portablelight.org, for more information. And the premise of this is really simple. We want to take this material, which is flexible solar material, and we want to try to use that material to produce light very efficiently, and also to produce some power so that people don't have to burn wood, because burning is not a very efficient way to make light. There's only like 3 to 7 lumens in a candle flame, and you need about 40 lumens to read, for example. So it's not good. It's not good for people. It's not good for their health. It's not good for women's lungs, and it's not good for the environment. So the notion is that we could create a kit which would have a very small amount of solar, either 2 or 1 panels, 4 watts or 2 watts. We designed a circuit, LED, and a reflector, and that this could create a kind of a platform around the simple USB out, a very small power out. So the question that we asked ourselves was not the typical question of how much power do we need, as much as possible. We asked how little power could we possibly use, and how could we make the best use out of that power, and how could we get it to the largest number of people. So we developed a soft optics system, and you'll see this young woman, Alina, kind of unfolding one of the solar textiles. And on computer, the images with the red arrows, we can model this in 3D in Rhino, which is a commonly used design software, squash it flat, make a developed surface, and then create a textile from that and test it and have very good light use in it. And you can see that we can just go from flat to form very, very quickly like this, and have, in essence, a kind of portable office or a portable workshop. This is something that's very rugged, very durable, very lightweight, and so forth. And this is really where the story changed. We were approached in Mexico by a group of women, and especially by master weaver Estela Hernandez, and one of her acquaintances, Dr. Stacy Schaefer, who's an anthropologist who worked with the Portable Light Project. And Estella said, I like these very much, but we can make our own. So she sort of said, thank you very much, but we can make our own. And these are the kitsuri. These are the woven bags that the Huixarica or the Huichol people make in Mexico. And they're not really like the bags that we carry around in that they have a very deep significance. It's a form of dreaming. It's like a form of praying to make one of them. And so they can stay in the family for generations, although the Huichol are making them also for sale of a different quality and with different patterns. So Estella made these bags with the help of Dr. Schaefer, and these are actually the first kind of hybridic, nomadic, thin film kitsuri bags. So a very kind of interesting hybrid. And what began to happen was we saw in many different countries of the world that these very simple kits that looked very generic here could be used in different ways. So that, for example, people could become their own producers of energy as well as consumers of clean energy. In this project, we worked with Massachusetts General Hospital and Zini Tebethela of iTeach in South Africa on the iTeach program, which is a bottom-up program trying to combat the co-epidemic in South Africa of multi-drug-resistant TB, tuberculosis, and AIDS. It's a very bad, dangerous combination. And it was Zini's idea to integrate the kit into a traditional South African blanket and then a hospital blanket, because people who have TB and AIDS, HIV, are very, very thin because they're coughing all the time, because they just have to cough, so they lose a lot of weight, they get very cold, and they need to be in the sun, and the blanket helps keep them warm so they can be in the sun, so that the UV component of the sun's rays can help cure the bacteria that causes TB. The interesting thing is that it was Zini's idea and her group's idea to use the cell phone network in South Africa. A very high percentage of people have cell phones, and a far less group has electricity. And in the cell phone network in South Africa, you can receive a text message for free. So she realized that there were millions of letters that were floating around unamortized. And so she set up a call center to coordinate the program of meds. So patients who can charge their cell phone with a device like Portable Light here can get a message or can get an icon. And as long as they don't respond, it's free. The minute they respond, they're charged. So it was a way of kind of co-opting a conventional cell phone network for this kind of new bottom-up work. This is a project that Paso Pacifico is doing with the Clinton Global Initiative in Nicaragua. Here, poachers who used to who are very poor people, who could only poach to make some money, are now being paid by large organizations like Conservation International and World Wildlife Fund to patrol beaches and to protect endangered animals like sea turtles in this case. And then at home, these are used for education programs. This is a new project that we're starting in Brazil now with EDP, the Brazilian electrical company. It's a beautiful idea about just using very original material in the Tabajos reserve area of the Amazon. And then lastly, I'll share with you the FLAP project, which is a project that was launched recently. This is a photo that my friend Eric Hersman took in Nairobi. And Eric took some flat bags, which are these little 2-watt bags here, and approached tailors, small middle-class business people in Nairobi, to get them to create designs and to talk about it. And Eric has this program, Ushahidi, which you should really check out if you don't know it already, where you can use your cell phone to become a citizen journalist. You can actually log on and indicate and map trouble spots. In this case, this is Haiti, but this is now operational in Japan. So I'll show you just the, I will show you the flap. This is my colleague Charles. He has a messenger bag there. It was made by Timbuktu. He throws away the bag and he has the flap, and he's gonna just have some fun with this thing. This is pure Charles. But while he's having this fun and showing that it's kind of pretty soft and flexible, I think it's interesting that infrastructure itself should change, that the things that were, like lighting, that electricity and so forth, could actually become much more malleable and kind of portable. So how are we on time? Should I stop there? 4 more minutes. All right, let's press on very quickly. So that got us thinking, what can we do in this country? How can we take lessons learned in the developing world and think about them in this world? And this is sort of interesting because usually the example is reversed, right? That you usually, we make something and after a while we say, oh, here, people in the developing world have it, get modern, here's the technology. But in this case, we actually learned a lot, and there's so much inventiveness that's going on in these countries, it's mind-blowing. So in the Soft House, we had a sort of simple idea, which was, what if we took a domestic curtain, like similar to the one in your uncle's house, and we asked it to do 2 new jobs, harvest energy and help with the lighting, and also distribute some DC power in the curtain. So from that was developed the idea of the Soft House. We actually have 2 sets of curtains. One is a horizontal curtain that moves on a track just from east to west, and then the other one is a vertical curtain that you see here, like a flower kind of goes up and down. We made many, many prototypes with all sorts of different flavors of flexible thin film solar. And we did a bunch of back-of-the-napkin calculations because we like to do that at MIT. And we realized that, even at these very small kind of densities, if you had 24 feet of curtain, you could charge a Prius battery, for example. Or if you had a little bit less, you could charge a laptop and so forth. And so we realized that we could this could be like a hybrid house. You could still have your centralized energy, but you could have a plug-and-play product that would immediately start generating clean energy for the household. And we realized we could probably take about 35% of the power that's used in a typical American household off the grid by using this. And we could also figure out, how much money the curtains were making and so forth. And I like that. I like the idea of my upholstery making money for me. The last time that my upholstery made money for me was when I found some quarters under my couch during the rare times that I clean. So anyway, the last part of this is that we now have a chance. We won a competition, and we have a chance with the Federal Republic of Germany and Patrizia, who are developers, to build some of these experimental row houses. And this is the site. It's in Wilhelmsburg. It's a very large river island, just south of Hafen City in Hamburg. And so our idea is to actually have 2 sets of textiles. One, an exterior textile, which is a PTFE, with a reflective side, and then have an interior textile that would hold light and distribute the power. So this is a very collapsed presentation, but as people tune this solar to the light, different patterns can emerge, which you see in yellow there, and we're using Rhino scripting software to do that. And then we've also developed a kind of an OS system, operating system for the house, and you see my colleague Patricia testing things there. She's actually looking at very fine control of lighting, of the LED lighting, which we can kind of pixelate that lives within these curtains. So I'll just bring up the last image to end, an image of what the Soft House will look like at EBA. Thank you very much.
I love that we started off with Lucy's hand earlier today, and we ended up with robotic DJs later in the afternoon. I think we've sort of covered 3.5 million years of human evolution and development fairly succinctly, I think, in some ways. I've had a question which I've wanted to ask ever since we talked about doing this panel, and it's related to some of the writing that I've been doing about the kind of the kind of time flavour of technology. And I think I wrote to each of you about this before. And we often think about digital technologies as being avant-garde and of the moment and, progressive and pushing forward. But anyone who works in digital technologies realises that, if you embed anything at all in digital, it becomes obsolescent about 5 seconds after you've done it, just in terms of having DVDs playing and all those sort of things in your work. The technology changes quite quickly. And so I'm curious to ask both of you about how that happens. Do you see your the work that you're doing as being kind of the moment because it's digital? Does it get frozen in a moment because it might have a USB connector, for example? How long, if it had a SCSI connector, it would be useless now because we can't do anything like that anymore, even that's a few years ago. And so it seems like as technology is changing, the protocols by which the digital information, which is theoretically just zeros and ones, but the vehicles by which we use it and apprehend it change quite quickly. So I'm wondering what relevance that has to both of your works.
Okay. That's a really good question. It's something that I struggle with because I teach in an art department, but I teach digital media, and it's a stress, isn't it? Like, technology is advancing all the time. You're going to get an upgrade inevitably, by the next semester and so on. And when you're working with technology, it does tend to get outdated, doesn't it? But I kind of embrace the idea of working with obsolete technology, and I even think of knitting as technology, as this really, low technology, even two needles and yarn, you can construct something. So I when I think about craft and technology, and I think of it as kind of a hobbyist, like kind of this garage tinkerer that sort of has the tenacity of a hobbyist and kind of experiments, which is why I'm so impressed with what was just presented, because, it's like, the stuff that I do, it's like I said, garage tinkerer kind of, you can do this stuff without, passing a physics class, yet, I don't know, I'm interested in what you have to say. That wasn't really, I dodged an answer there, but...
I think that it depends on the sort of scale, doesn't it? I think for architecture, it's very important to try to use materials that can be as durable as possible. It's probably something very fundamental to that. So when we look at an LED, or when we look at the Solon AG material, the new thin film product that's actually being made, not for Soft House, but it's just about to be released. Those are materials that last, an LED lasts much, much longer, orders of magnitude longer than a conventional light bulb. And then the solar material has a 25-year warranty, which is pretty typical for a roofing material. So there are cycles on a building. Certain parts need to remain, and the other parts shed. The construction material on the Soft House is Brettstoffel, which is you may know it, it's a very traditional solid wood planked material. At the scale of something smaller and more portable, like Portable Light, I think it's fantastic that there's a USB platform, and I think it will be around for a little while. It's pretty amazing, this kind of moment of transition that's going on right now, sort of under our very noses. In I think, 2011, it's projected that every minute there'll be 1,000 new cell phone users every minute. So think how many today, and during the conference, many new folks are joining a cell phone network. And those people are in Southeast Asia, they're in South America, they're in India, in Africa. And that's why in 2009 there was a new protocol that was established for USB for charging that. So as long as that cell phone wave is happening, I think that the USB will be a pretty solid, low-power platform.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thank you. So, any questions from the audience? Philip, where's Philip? Where's his question?
Comment. I was curious, Kat, and I was really happy that you did a piece about the Triangle Fire. Are you continuing? Are you going to do any other projects with that? The reason I ask is, of course, because of what's happening, for example, in Wisconsin, and how relevant still the fire was 100 years ago, and then with the fire in Bangladesh. And so I'm curious if you're continuing with that.
Thanks for asking. I think that it might be better to do a number of different projects that you can kind of continue to invigorate, new audiences. And so the way that I imagine that project, this is a very short project for me in terms of using craft as an organizing tool. Stitch for Senate was 2 years, and the Nike blanket was 5, and this was 6 weeks. So I kind of really enjoyed the idea that it would have quick turnaround. So actually those bands are going to go to a worker center that is in Bangladesh, and it's and I volunteer with an anti-sweatshop campaign called Sweat Free Communities and International Labor Rights Coalition, and so they're sort of arranging this exchange. So yeah, this is going to move there, but I don't know if it's going to live on. And I think it might be worthwhile to kind of brainstorm, if you like this kind of work, ways of replicating it, like I said, to get other people involved.
And on that note, I actually had a great-great-aunt that died in that fire. I actually had two great-great-aunts that were in there, and one lived and one died. And I, too, did a piece in reaction. But that's one part of my practice is craft activism. And the piece I made is now an FIT in commemoration for the anniversary. But if anyone else is, and I'd like to have a discussion with you, but I also wanted to open up if anyone else is interested in talking further, maybe this evening, about continuing ideas and commemorating and engaging in discussion about the Triangle Fire, to talk to us maybe later on. Thanks.
Carol.
Sheila, can you talk just a little bit, you talked about the scripted stone pretty quickly, and that it's a single unit that's then rotated. Can you talk a little bit about the development of that unit itself? Because if you're, limiting yourself to a single unit of form, how was it you went about making that?
That's a good question. I was trying to make a distinction between the KUKA project, where within the work volume of the robot, you can, in theory, do any task. Of course, the robot, the one we're working with, has a very human, endearing quality of being prone to error. So it's actually more endearingly human than you might think. But with the stone, its architecture is a very slow to change discipline, and the building industry is even slower to change. And that's part of the big problem that we have today with manufacturing, with the kind of old, dirty ways of manufacturing, and with the kind of poor quality of our built environment. The manufacturing industry is very risk averse in general. And so often you have to use standard elements, and so you can't just hand create a form. You need to use received sticks, which we call 2x4s, sheets, which are plywood, and so forth. And so it's economical to have standard pieces of stone. And what we wanted to do was to make a unity at the top, like a kind of larger version of the stone window, and then start to fray that at the bottom through the rotation, so that if you look at that image again, if you go to our website or something, the idea is that you can see both the kind of oneness of the law, if you will, and also the fact that it's individual and always turning, And so that was the kind of larger formal agenda behind that. That's at the entry, so you have to kind of pass through that to go into the building, and you're presented with a very big kind of new view from this old traditional street to a green courtyard, which is in the center, the heart of the law school.
I have a question, and I want to thank both of you for really inspiring presentations. Sheila, could you talk a little bit about the solar blanket for TB
Yes, for TB, for tuberculosis. Yes.
Right, and the phone charging with that? I didn't catch what you meant. And also, one other one, what is the amount of power coming out of those solar curtains?
Sure. So the first one is that the project was a collaboration between the Portable Light Project and the Massachusetts General Hospital and a group in South Africa called iTeach. And iTeach is about thinking and implementing new ways to deal with the crisis. The numbers of people, the millions of people in the developing world who have really severe healthcare problems, and TB is just but one of them, is so vast, the numbers are so vast, that there is no traditional top-down healthcare system that can work. And so iTeach is is developing a program where local people and traditional healers work together. They're like roving nurses, and they attend to patients so that for those rural patients who really are too sick to come to clinic or can't afford to come to clinic. So the blanket keeps them warm, as I mentioned. They sit outside. The solar panels absorb light. That's transformed into electricity. That's saved in a cell phone battery. And then the device is used at night by the family that's taking care of that individual that really needs to provide 24-hour care at great economic expense to that family. And the USB provides a cell phone charging input so that they can charge their cell phones and they can then receive the text messages from the call center that's set up. So it's a small power infrastructure that's connected, that's piggybacked onto a larger existing kind of a urban or national network with a phone company. Does that answer your question? Yes. The second question about the solar curtains really depends on the length, but it depends on the length and the exposure. But looking together at a house with about 30 to 40 feet of curtain, we think that even in the vertical orientation, which is a vertical plane, we could probably take off the grid between 30 and 35% of the amount of electricity that a typical American household consumes. And in Portugal, that's a lot more because they consume less. So, yes. I mean, it's just a long story, and in California, you're leaders at this, but you may know that we can't just snap our fingers and wish away the brittle, centralized, costly grid that we have that's leaky, that's very inefficient. We just can't do it. Nor can we wait, I suppose, for legislation to change it all. So what do we do? If, as architects, I think one possibility is that we can start creating things that are ready to work right away, so that you may have a house that has connected to a regular grid, but you plug in a curtain, or you plug in a solar rocker, and you start then paying less money to the utility company, because utility companies in states like New York and other states don't like to put solar power onto the grid. There's a lot of legislation about that. There are lawsuits and so forth. We really ran into that problem when we were doing the ferry terminal in New York City. So forget the utility company. Just start making these things, stop paying your bills, and soon they'll get your attention, and that will actually be the change that we want to happen with the infrastructure. Now that's smart. We can't just wait around for the smart infrastructure to happen.
Sheila, in that same vein, I wanted to know a little bit more about the ferry terminal roof, the fabric. So what exactly happens with that solar fabric? Does it...
That fabric is not solar. That's just a daylighting fabric. And it's a shape like this, which is the first so-called lens-like textile roof in the United States. And all the forces are resolved, so all we have to worry about is gravity in this structural design. And it creates this interesting hollow, because you have to wrap it all the way around. The top is a PTFE that's made, I think, by Saint-Gobain, if memory serves me correctly. The bottom is this Versailles material, which is a more translucent metal spluttered material, and they work together. And you have this deep kind of poche or pocket space in the middle. And so we put these large daylighting wells in so that light can come down more easily. And at night, that's illuminated with energy-efficient lighting, which is called LED lighting, solid-state lighting.
Beautiful. And then the winter and the building code. So how does the building code fit in with the snow and all that?
It's fine. The snow falls on it, and it just falls off. It's not actually a new material. It has been up in buildings since the 1970s. It's just new to the city of New York. It's new to the New York Department of Transportation. It's new to the EDC, the Economic Development Corporation in New York, but it's not a new material, and I think it will do very well. We're fortunate to have a great interdisciplinary team, project team, including our engineers working on that.
Well, I think we're just about at the end of our time today, so I'd like everyone to thank all of our numerous speakers today.